I still remember that crisp Tuesday morning when I stepped outside to collect my mail, only to find a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. As my eyes scanned the page, my jaw practically unhinged itself. Your front yard will be utilized for the HOA's new Community Fitness Route project. Please do not obstruct installation. Thank you for your cooperation. No signature, no contact information, just a sterile official-looking stamp from our homeowners association at the bottom. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't asking. They were telling me they'd be using my property, and I was expected to smile and nod like an obedient puppet. I stood there for a good minute, letter dangling from my fingertips, wondering if this was someone's idea of a practical joke. I'd heard stories about overzealous HOAs in other neighborhoods, but ours had always been relatively reasonable. That's when I noticed her, Karen Wilkins, standing across the street, clipboard clutched against her chest like a medieval shield, watching me with that half-smile that never quite reached her eyes. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Karen, though not necessarily for good reasons. She had ascended to the HOA board about 8 months ago and had immediately made it her mission to enforce every obscure rule in the HOA handbook, adding her own interpretations when the existing rules didn't suit her agenda. Last month, she had fined the Johnsons for planting marigolds because they weren't on her approved neighborhood aesthetic list, despite no such list existing in our HOA documentation. As our eyes met, Karen's smile widened. With deliberate slowness, she crossed the street toward me, each step radiating the confidence of someone who believed the world bent to their will. "Good morning. I see you've received our notice about the fitness route. Exciting, isn't it?" Her voice carried that saccharine quality that made my teeth ache. I folded the notice carefully, buying myself time to control my expression. "Actually, Karen, I'm a bit confused. My property line extends all the way to the sidewalk. The HOA doesn't have the authority to just appropriate part of my yard?" Karen's smile didn't falter, but something hard flashed in her eyes. "Well, Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the HOA agreement clearly states that the association can utilize portions of front-facing property for community improvement projects. This fitness route will increase property values, promote healthy lifestyles, and bring our community together. I'm surprised you'd be against such a positive initiative." The problem was, I had read our HOA agreement thoroughly before purchasing my home 3 years ago. It was practically a hobby of mine to understand contracts before signing them, and I knew for a fact that no such provision existed. "I'd like to see that specific section, Karen, because I've read the agreement and I don't recall anything allowing the HOA to use private property without owner consent." For a millisecond, uncertainty flickered across her features, but she recovered quickly. "I'll have the board secretary email you the relevant documentation. In the meantime, the installation team will be here tomorrow morning. Please ensure your yard is clear of any personal items." With that, she pivoted on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there with mounting frustration and disbelief. I spent the rest of the day alternating between researching property law and pacing my living room. By evening, I had received no email with the supposed documentation Karen had promised. I called my friend John, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law. After explaining the situation, John's response was exactly what I'd suspected. They can't do that, period. HOAs have certain rights regarding aesthetics and maintenance standards, but they absolutely cannot commandeer portions of your private property for their pet projects without your consent or a specific easement. He promised to look over our HOA documents more thoroughly and get back to me, but his initial assessment confirmed my understanding. That night I barely slept, imagining Karen and her minions descending upon my yard with measuring tapes and boundary markers, carving up my property while I watched helplessly from the window. Little did I know that Karen's fitness route was about to become the catalyst for a neighborhood saga that would test my patience, creativity, and ultimately my sprinkler system's water pressure, in ways I never could have anticipated. The next morning, I awoke to the unmistakable sound of metal stakes being hammered into my front lawn. I bolted out of bed, not even bothering to change out of my pajamas, and rushed to the front door. What I saw made my blood pressure spike instantaneously. Karen, dressed in what appeared to be brand new athletic wear, with the price tags barely removed, was supervising two confused-looking men as they installed small orange flags in a winding pattern across my yard. Next to her stood a woman with a camera, documenting the momentous occasion for what I assumed would be the HOA newsletter. The scene was so bizarre it momentarily stunned me into silence. I watched as they placed markers, unrolled measuring tape, and discussed the optimal route for maximum fitness benefit, as if they were designing an Olympic training facility rather than vandalizing my property. "Excuse me," I finally managed, stepping outside. The workman looked up, clearly relieved to see the actual homeowner appear, while Karen's expression hardened into that professional smile that never reached her eyes. "We're just marking the route," she explained, as if I was a child who needed the simplest explanation. "The actual installation begins tomorrow. We'll be adding some weatherproof exercise instruction signs, distance markers, and small decorative elements to make the route more engaging for users." I rubbed my temples, fighting the urge to simply scream. "Karen, as I mentioned yesterday, you do not have my permission to install anything on my property. I've consulted with an attorney who confirmed that nothing in our HOA agreement gives you this authority." The woman with the camera lowered it slightly, suddenly interested in the confrontation unfolding before her. Karen's smile tightened. "Actually, the board voted unanimously last night. I was going to email you, but it got late. This project falls under the Community Wellness Initiative, which all homeowners agreed to when purchasing in this neighborhood." This was complete fiction, and we both knew it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from John. "Got the HOA agreement. Found nothing about them having right to use your property. Call me." That was all I needed. "Karen, I'm asking you and these workers to leave my property immediately. If you don't, I'll be forced to call the police and report you for trespassing." The workmen exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them quietly set down his tools. Karen's face flushed pink, then red. "You're being ridiculous. This is for the community good. Do you know how many people would benefit from this fitness route? Are you really going to be the one house that refuses to participate?" The woman with the camera was now openly recording our confrontation, which I suspected might be Karen's attempt to shame me publicly. "I support community initiatives, Karen. What I don't support is you arbitrarily deciding to use my private property without permission. There are plenty of public areas in the neighborhood that would be perfect for your fitness route." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. "This isn't over. The HOA has ways of dealing with non-cooperative homeowners. Suddenly your grass might be deemed too long, your house color slightly off regulation. There are fees for those violations, you know, substantial ones." Her threat was so blatant that even the camera woman looked uncomfortable. I smiled, maintaining eye contact. "Are you threatening me, Karen? Because that sounded very much like a threat, and I believe our friend here caught it on camera." I nodded toward the camera woman, whose eyes widened. "I'd like copies of that footage, by the way." Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Without another word, she gestured sharply to her team, and they began packing up their equipment. As they retreated, Karen turned back. "This isn't the end. The board will hear about your selfishness." I watched them leave, my mind already racing with what would undoubtedly come next. I needed to prepare, to build a case, and most importantly, to find a way to protect my property from Karen's fitness crusade. That afternoon, I met with John at a coffee shop down the street. He brought copies of the HOA agreement with relevant sections highlighted, as well as printed summaries of local property law. "Look," he said, pointing to a specific paragraph. "There's nothing, absolutely nothing in here about the HOA having the right to use your property for community projects. They can regulate appearance, maintenance, certain usage aspects, but they cannot simply appropriate your land." He sipped his coffee, then added, "What's interesting is that Karen seems to know this. She's bluffing, trying to bulldoze you with false authority." I scrolled through my phone, showing him pictures I'd taken of the flags they'd planted in my yard. "What should I do if they come back? Get a restraining order?" John considered this. "Document everything, first of all. If they return, record the interaction, state clearly they don't have permission to be there. but honestly, I think we need to be proactive. Tomorrow I'll draft a formal cease and desist letter, but—" He hesitated, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Have you considered more creative approaches to protecting your property?" John's question about creative approaches stuck with me long after our meeting. That night, as I paced my living room, occasionally peeking through the blinds to make sure Karen wasn't prowling around my yard in the darkness, an idea began to take shape. My gaze drifted to the corner of my garage, where I'd stashed some unused irrigation equipment from a backyard garden project I'd abandoned last summer. Among the items was a set of high-quality retractable sprinkler heads, the kind that remain hidden beneath the lawn until activated, then pop up to water the surrounding area. A slow smile spread across my face as I imagined Karen and her fitness enthusiasts getting an unexpected shower during their morning routines. It wasn't destructive or harmful, just a homeowner watering his lawn. The fact that the timing might coincide with Karen's fitness activities would be purely coincidental, of course. The next day was Saturday, ideal for my project. I got to work early, carefully measuring and mapping out strategic locations across my front yard. I needed coverage that would reach any potential fitness route without creating obvious dead spots in my lawn's irrigation. By mid-morning, I had dug several small holes and was laying the PVC pipe that would connect to my existing irrigation system. My neighbor Mary peeked over the fence, curiosity written across her face. "New sprinkler system?" she asked, eyeing the equipment spread across my driveway. Mary had her own history with Karen. Last spring, Karen had reported Mary's blue front door as a non-conforming color choice, despite there being no specific color restrictions in our agreement. After weeks of harassment, Mary had eventually repainted, a capitulation that still clearly bothered her. I wiped sweat from my brow and nodded. "Just upgrading the coverage. My grass has been a little patchy lately." Mary's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I heard about Karen's fitness route plans. She came by yesterday asking if I'd sign a petition supporting it. Mentioned something about one homeowner creating obstacles." She rolled her eyes. "I declined to sign." I laughed, appreciating the solidarity. "Well, I'm just making sure my lawn stays properly hydrated. It's important to maintain neighborhood standards, you know." Mary's laugh was bright and genuine. "Oh, absolutely. Karen's all about standards. Hey, if you need any help with your irrigation project, just holler. My son's got some experience with sprinkler systems." With a conspiratorial wink, she returned to her gardening, leaving me to continue my work with renewed enthusiasm. By late afternoon, I had installed 6 retractable sprinkler heads in my front yard, connected them to my water supply, and carefully concealed all evidence of the installation. The sprinkler heads were virtually invisible when retracted, hiding just beneath the grass line. I also installed a smart controller that would allow me to activate the system remotely from my phone, a feature that would prove invaluable in the coming days. As a final touch, I placed a small, easily overlooked sign near the edge of my property that read, "Caution, automated irrigation system in use, area may be wet." The sign was technically a legal protection, though I deliberately chose a size and location that wouldn't immediately draw attention. The entire setup had cost me just under $300 and a Saturday's worth of labor, a small price to pay for the peace of mind and potential entertainment value. That evening I tested the system briefly. The sprinkler heads rose silently from their hiding places, released a powerful spray in a 360-degree radius, and then retracted smoothly back into the ground. Perfect. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction imagining the scene that would unfold when Karen and her fitness route enthusiasts encountered my lawn's new feature. Some might call it petty revenge, but I preferred to think of it as creative property protection. After all, I was simply maintaining my lawn according to HOA standards, and if anyone happened to get wet while trespassing on my property, well, they had been warned. As I was putting away my tools, I noticed Karen driving slowly past my house, her gaze fixed intently on my front yard. I waved pleasantly, and she quickly looked away, accelerating down the street. That night, I received an email from the HOA secretary, clearly dictated by Karen, announcing the official launch of the Neighborhood Wellness Initiative, scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning. All residents were invited to participate in the inaugural Walk of the Fitness route, which would graciously incorporate portions of community-minded homeowners' front yards. Attached was a crude map showing a winding path through several properties, including mine. Notably absent was any mention of the homeowner's consent or any legal basis for using private property. I forwarded the email to John with a simple message. The cease and desist letter might need to wait until after Monday. I have a feeling the situation might resolve itself naturally. His response came quickly. Should I be concerned about what you're planning? I smiled as I typed back, not at all, just ensuring my lawn stays properly hydrated during these dry spring days. Monday morning arrived with picture-perfect weather, clear blue skies, mild temperature, and just enough breeze to rustle the leaves. It was, in Karen's words from her latest community email blast, the ideal day to launch our revolutionary fitness initiative that will transform our neighborhood into a beacon of health and wellness. I woke up early, made a large pot of coffee, and positioned myself strategically at my front window with a clear view of my yard. Right on schedule, at 8:45 a.m., Karen arrived with her entourage. She was dressed in what appeared to be brand new athletic wear, bright pink leggings and a matching jacket with Community Wellness Champion printed across the back. Following her was a small group of neighbors, some looking genuinely excited, others clearly there under duress, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed annoyance. Karen had also managed to attract a reporter from the local community paper who was taking photos and jotting notes as Karen gesticulated grandly toward the makeshift fitness route. From my vantage point, I watched as Karen's team quickly set up a small podium on the sidewalk in front of my yard. They hung a banner reading "Grand Opening Neighborhood Fitness Route" between two portable stands and arranged a table with water bottles and what looked like brochures detailing the initiative. Karen was in her element, directing people where to stand, adjusting the banner when it tilted, and repeatedly checking her reflection in her phone's camera. She had even brought along small flags for participants to wave during what I assumed would be her grand opening speech. The entire scene would have been almost admirable in its organization if it weren't for the small detail that half of their setup was trespassing on my private property. At precisely 9 a.m., Karen tapped on a portable microphone, producing feedback that made several attendees wince. Good morning, neighbors and friends. Today marks a historic moment in our community's journey toward better health and stronger connections. Her voice rang out across the gathering, dripping with self-importance. As your HOA Activities Coordinator and Wellness Committee Chair, I am proud to introduce the first phase of our neighborhood fitness route. Polite applause followed, though I noticed several neighbors checking their watches, clearly wondering how long this ceremony would last. Karen continued, her voice rising with evangelical fervor. This route will transform our mundane daily walks into structured fitness opportunities with stations for stretching, strength training, and mindfulness, all within our beautiful neighborhood setting. As Karen launched into a detailed explanation of how she had collaborated with fitness experts, though I strongly suspected these experts existed only in her imagination, I checked the app controlling my sprinkler system. Everything was ready. I waited patiently as Karen wrapped up her speech and prepared for the ribbon cutting. And now, she announced, we will officially open our fitness route with an inaugural walk. Everyone please line up behind me to experience the route firsthand. She positioned herself at the edge of my lawn, giant ceremonial scissors in hand, ready to cut a ribbon strung across what was unquestionably my property. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. As Karen snipped the ribbon and stepped onto my lawn, leading her parade of reluctant fitness enthusiasts, I tapped the activation button on my app. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. 6 powerful jets of water shot up from the ground in perfect synchronization, creating a offensive spray that caught Karen and the front row of participants completely by surprise. Karen's shriek could probably be heard 3 blocks away as the water soaked her expensive athletic wear and meticulously styled hair. the fitness enthusiasts behind her scattered in all directions, some laughing, some cursing, all of them thoroughly drenched. The reporter, who had fortunately for him been standing back to get a wider shot, was now eagerly photographing the chaos, likely realizing he had a much better story than the puff piece Karen had promised him. Karen herself stood frozen for a moment, makeup running down her face, her community wellness champion jacket clinging to her like a second skin, before she found her voice. "Turn it off! Turn these sprinklers off immediately!" she screamed, looking wildly around as if expecting to find a manual shutoff valve. Taking that as my cue, I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, wearing an expression of innocent surprise. "Oh my goodness, is everyone okay?" I called out, making my way toward the soaked group. "I'm so sorry about that. My automatic sprinkler system is set to water the lawn at this time. Did you not see the warning sign?" I pointed to my small but legally adequate sign as Karen stormed toward me, water squishing in her expensive athletic shoes with each furious step. "You did this on purpose," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "You deliberately sabotaged the fitness route opening." I maintained my expression of confused concern. "Karen, why would I do that? I'm just maintaining my lawn according to the HOA's strict landscaping requirements. Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the HOA agreement clearly states that all front lawns must be properly maintained and adequately watered." I was quoting the actual HOA regulation, throwing her own tactics back at her. "Besides," I added, "I wasn't aware that anyone would be on my lawn at this hour. This is private property after all." By now, several neighbors had gathered around us, many failing to hide their amusement at Karen's bedraggled appearance. Mary from next door was openly grinning while pretending to console a drenched participant. The reporter was scribbling furiously, clearly delighted with this unexpected turn of events. Karen looked around, suddenly aware that she was losing control of both the situation and her audience. "This isn't over," she said through clenched teeth. "The HOA board will hear about this blatant act of sabotage." I nodded sympathetically. "I understand you're upset, Karen. Water can be so unpredictable, but perhaps this is an opportunity to reconsider the route. The community park has plenty of space and is actually designated for public activities." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she turned and began gathering her soggy materials, barking orders at her few remaining loyal supporters to help clean up the mess. As the crowd dispersed, several neighbors patted me on the back or gave me subtle thumbs-up signs when they thought Karen wasn't looking. The reporter approached me for a comment, but I politely declined, suggesting he speak with Karen about her innovative community wellness vision instead. I returned to my house, feeling a mix of satisfaction and wariness. I had won this round, but I knew Karen well enough to understand that this was just the beginning. She would be back with new tactics, and I needed to be prepared. Still, as I watched her drive away, her car filled with waterlogged promotional materials and her carefully crafted image literally washed away, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. In this case, through 6 well-placed sprinkler heads and impeccable timing. I knew Karen wouldn't take her public humiliation lying down, but even I was surprised by how quickly she mobilized her resources. By Wednesday morning, less than 48 hours after the sprinkler incident, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA. It detailed my deliberate sabotage of a community event and demanded that I remove the hazardous irrigation system immediately or face daily fines of $100 for creating unsafe conditions. The letter was signed by all 5 HOA board members, though I strongly suspected most had signed without fully understanding the situation. Attached was a new copy of the HOA regulations with certain passages highlighted, none of which actually supported their position but were vague enough to seem intimidating to someone who didn't read carefully. The highlighted section about maintaining neighborhood safety standards was particularly rich, coming from someone who had tried to commandeer private property without permission. I studied the letter carefully, noting how it cleverly twisted the narrative. According to Karen's version of events, I had maliciously interfered with a pre-approved community wellness initiative by deliberately activating hidden water devices with the sole intent to cause harm and embarrassment. There was no mention, of course, of the fact that this pre-approved initiative involved trespassing on my property, or that my hidden water devices were standard irrigation equipment with a clearly posted warning sign. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat. Continued obstruction of community initiatives may result in additional fines and possible legal action. It was signed by Karen in her official capacity as HOA Compliance Officer, a title I was fairly certain she had invented for the occasion, as I'd never heard it used before. I forwarded the letter to John, who responded with an impressed whistle during our phone call. "She works fast, I'll give her that," he said. "But this is legally meaningless. They can't fine you for having a standard sprinkler system on your own property. The fact that Karen chose to walk across your lawn during a scheduled watering is her problem, not yours." He paused, then added more seriously, "That said, she's escalating this, which means we need to be prepared for what comes next. I'll draft a formal response citing the relevant property laws and HOA limitations. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction, every letter, every strange car that drives by your house slowly." John's ominous tone made me glance out my window, half expecting to see Karen lurking behind a tree with binoculars. "Do you think she'd really take this to court?" I asked, still staring at the letter with its official-looking letterhead and intimidating legal jargon. John chuckled darkly. "No chance. She knows she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. This is about intimidation and saving face. Karen's the type who wins by making the fight so unpleasant that most people just give in, rather than deal with the hassle." He was right, of course. Karen's power had always stemmed from people's desire for a quiet life. It was simply easier to repaint a door or move a basketball hoop than to challenge her authority. "So what's our play here?" I asked. "We wait," John replied. "Respond formally to the letter, maintain your position, and document everything. My guess is she'll try a few more intimidation tactics before making her real move." I didn't have to wait long to see Karen's next move. The following morning, I opened my front door to find a building inspector and 2 HOA board members standing on my porch. The inspector, a tired-looking man who clearly wished he were anywhere else, explained that they had received a complaint about unpermitted irrigation work that potentially violated county building codes. Karen stood across the street, not even attempting to hide her smug expression as she watched the proceedings. She had dressed for the occasion in a crisp pantsuit that screamed unofficial neighborhood prosecutor, her arms crossed expectantly as she waited for the inspector to deliver his verdict. The 2 board members, Diane, a retired teacher who generally followed Karen's lead, and Thomas, a quieter man who rarely spoke at meetings, looked decidedly uncomfortable. "We've received a report about significant plumbing modifications being made without proper permits," the inspector explained, consulting his clipboard. "The complaint specifically mentions underground piping and electrical work." I nodded understandingly while mentally noting how Karen had embellished the scope of my weekend project. "Of course, I'm happy to show you the system," I replied pleasantly. "It's a simple extension of my existing irrigation setup. I just added a few sprinkler heads." The inspector looked relieved at my cooperation, having clearly expected resistance based on whatever Karen had told him. I led the group around my yard, explaining the straightforward installation while the board members trailed behind like reluctant witnesses at a crime scene. The inspector asked to see my sprinkler system, and I cooperatively showed him the setup, explaining that it was a simple connection to my existing permitted irrigation system, no different from what many homeowners in the neighborhood had. After examining the installation, he nodded, made a few notes, and said, "This falls under standard homeowner maintenance. No permit required for this type of work." I could practically feel Karen's glare burning into the back of my head as the inspector left without issuing any citation. Diane and Thomas mumbled awkward goodbyes, clearly eager to distance themselves from this increasingly embarrassing situation. As they retreated, I gave Karen a friendly wave. Her face contorted briefly before she spun on her heel and marched back to her house. slamming her front door hard enough that the sound echoed down the street. But Karen wasn't finished. Later that same day, as I returned from grocery shopping, I found a pile of garbage strewn across my front lawn. Coffee grounds, food wrappers, and what appeared to be the contents of someone's vacuum cleaner. Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly neighbor who spent most of her days watching the street from her front window, called out to me as I stared at the mess. It was that Wilkins boy, she informed me, referring to Karen's 17-year-old son Tyler, came by about an hour ago, looked around to make sure no one was watching. Didn't see me, of course, and dumped a garbage bag right on your grass. Then he took a picture with his phone before running off. I thanked Mrs. Abernathy for the information as I began cleaning up the disgusting mess. This was getting ridiculous. I collected the garbage carefully, using gloves and placing it all in a clean bag as evidence. I documented the scene with photos from multiple angles, even collecting a distinctive candy wrapper that I'd seen Tyler eating at community events. This went into my growing file of Karen incidents. The next morning brought another surprise, an anonymous complaint to animal control claiming I was operating an illegal dog breeding business from my home. The fact that I didn't own a dog and never had made the accusation absurd enough that the animal control officer actually apologized for having to follow up on it. "We get these spite complaints sometimes," he confided, as he prepared to leave, having confirmed there were no signs of dog breeding, dogs, or even dog food on the premises. Between you and me, this came from the same person who's filed 6 noise complaints against the Miller family's beagle and tried to report the community garden for harboring wild animals when they installed a butterfly habitat. He glanced down at his clipboard and grimaced. A Ms. Wilkins. We shared a knowing look before he departed, promising that this visit wouldn't go on any official record. That afternoon, I returned home to find a bright orange sticker on my mailbox declaring it non-compliant with HOA standards and demanding immediate adjustment. The specific violation listed was improper height, allegedly 3 inches taller than regulation. I measured it immediately, finding it exactly at the 42-inch height specified in the HOA guidelines. The next day, I received a notice that my garbage cans had been visible from the street for more than the allowed 12 hours, despite the fact that I had rolled them out that morning precisely for scheduled pickup and returned them to my garage immediately after. Each violation notice came with its own threatened fine, each more substantial than the last. The final straw came Friday afternoon when I received an email notification that a special HOA meeting had been called for Monday evening. The agenda included a single item: vote on new regulations regarding lawn irrigation systems and property usage. It was clear that Karen, unable to win through conventional means, was now attempting to change the rules entirely. This was no longer just about a fitness route. It had become a battle for basic property rights within our neighborhood. I called John immediately. "She's trying to rewrite the HOA regulations to retroactively justify her actions," I explained, forwarding him the meeting notice. "We need to rally the neighbors before this meeting." John agreed. "It's time to go on the offensive." "I'll be there Monday night with all the legal ammunition we need. In the meantime, start talking to your neighbors. I suspect many of them have their own Karen stories." Over the weekend, I did exactly that, going door to door throughout the neighborhood. I didn't have to work hard to convince people. Almost everyone had experienced Karen's particular brand of HOA tyranny at some point. Mary's blue door incident was just the tip of the iceberg. The Rodriguez family had been fined for hanging their grandson's art project in their front window. Unauthorized external decorations. Mrs. Abernathy showed me a file of violation notices regarding her bird feeder. Unsanctioned wildlife attractant. The Patels had received threatening letters about their holiday decorations being excessive and culturally incongruous with neighborhood aesthetics. The Jenkins family had been reported for having basketball practice in their own driveway too early in the morning, with Karen apparently measuring the decibel levels of bouncing balls from her bedroom window at 7 a.m. The Wilson family, who lived 2 doors down from Karen, had perhaps the most troubling story. Their 9-year-old daughter Emily had set up a small lemonade stand last summer. Karen had not only shut it down, citing unlicensed commercial activity in a residential zone, but had called the police when they initially refused to comply. The responding officer, to his credit, had purchased 2 cups of lemonade and gently suggested to Karen that this might not be the best use of emergency services. Emily was in tears, Mrs. Wilson told me, still angry at the memory. She'd been saving for a rescue dog donation. Karen made her feel like a criminal. As I collected these stories, a pattern emerged. Karen had been systematically bullying the neighborhood for months, using the HOA as her personal enforcement tool. She particularly targeted families with children, the elderly, and newer residents who might not be familiar with their rights under the HOA agreement. My sprinkler incident wasn't just about me. It represented the first time someone had successfully stood up to her, and many neighbors were quietly cheering me on. What surprised me most was how isolated each household had felt in their struggle against Karen. Each family thought they were the only ones being singled out for violations, never realizing that Karen's reign of terror spanned the entire community. By Sunday night, I had spoken with over 20 families, most of whom promised to attend Monday's meeting. Several offered to share their experiences publicly if needed, while others provided copies of their violation notices for our growing documentation file. The community center could hold 50 people comfortably, and I was beginning to think we might exceed that capacity. I also installed a small security camera facing my front yard, just in case Karen decided to stage another garbage incident or something worse. Given her escalating tactics, I wouldn't put it past her to damage my property and then report me for violating maintenance standards. As I made final preparations for the meeting, checking and double-checking my documentation, I received an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your email. You might find the attached video interesting. A friend on the board." Intrigued and slightly wary, I opened my email to find a message with a video attachment labeled Pre-Meeting Discussion 4, 15.ho Truth. I scanned the file for viruses before opening it, half expecting a trick, but what I found was far more valuable. The video showed Karen in what appeared to be the community center office before an earlier meeting, speaking with Diane and another board member I recognized as James Peterson. The footage was slightly grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. "I don't care what it takes," Karen was saying, her voice tight with anger. "He made me look like a fool in front of everyone with that sprinkler stunt. We need to make an example of him." Diane looked uncomfortable but nodded along, while James frowned. "Karen, I'm not sure we have the authority to—" Karen cut him off sharply. "Authority? We'll make the authority. That's what these new regulations are for. We'll write them so specifically that his system violates at least 3 provisions, then hit him with the maximum fines until he either removes it or moves out." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And once we've dealt with him, we can expand the fitness route across all the front yards as originally planned. The Community Wellness Initiative will position me perfectly for the neighborhood council election next year." James shifted uncomfortably. "But what about the property line issues? And doesn't the HOA agreement specifically protect homeowners' rights to—" Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Nobody reads those agreements in detail. We just need to sound official enough, and most people back down. If he wants to be difficult, we'll make his life difficult. Trust me, I've done this before." The video continued for another minute, with Karen explicitly stating her plan to make an example of me because I had damaged her reputation. She outlined her strategy to use the HOA regulations as a weapon, admitting that there was no actual basis for her fitness route plan, but that she would create one if necessary. It was exactly the smoking gun I needed. I forwarded the video to John with a simple message: "I think we're ready for tomorrow." His reply was equally concise: "This is better than I could have hoped for. Karen has no idea what's coming." That night I could barely sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the past 2 weeks, from Karen's initial boundary violation to the impending showdown at tomorrow's meeting. Part of me felt almost sorry for her. It was clear from the video that her obsession with the fitness route had less to do with community wellness and more to do with her political ambitions and wounded pride. But any sympathy quickly evaporated when I remembered the stress her campaign had caused not just to me, but to the entire neighborhood. Sometimes people like Karen only learned their lesson when publicly confronted with the consequences of their actions. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself hoping that tomorrow's meeting would be not just a victory for me, but the beginning of positive change for our entire community. Monday evening arrived with an almost electric tension in the air. The HOA meetings were typically held in the community center, a modest building usually populated by no more than 10 people for these events. Tonight, however, the parking lot was full, and by the time I arrived with John, people were claiming whatever seats remained. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, shuffling papers with an air of officialness that seemed exaggerated even for her. She glanced up as I entered, her expression flickering briefly with surprise at the unusual attendance, before settling back into cool confidence. She clearly hadn't anticipated that I would mobilize so many neighbors, but she quickly recovered, leaning over to whisper something to the HOA president, a semi-retired accountant named Frank, who generally preferred peace over conflict. The meeting began promptly at 7 p.m. with the usual formalities: approval of previous minutes, treasurer's report, and announcements. Throughout these proceedings, Karen kept shooting glances at her watch, clearly impatient to get to the main agenda item. Finally, Frank cleared his throat and announced, "We'll now move to the proposed amendment regarding lawn irrigation systems and property usage." Karen straightened in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she prepared to present her carefully crafted new regulations. "Thank you, Frank," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "As many of you know, we recently encountered a situation where irrigation equipment was used in a manner that created unsafe conditions during a community wellness event. To prevent future incidents and ensure the safety of all residents, I propose the following amendments to our HOA regulations." She proceeded to outline a series of restrictive measures that would essentially give the HOA, meaning Karen, control over when and how homeowners could water their lawns, as well as the right to temporarily utilize portions of front yards for community activities without requiring individual homeowner approval. The proposed fines for violations were steep, starting at $250 for first offenses and escalating rapidly. As she spoke, I could feel the tension in the room growing. Even residents who hadn't been directly affected by Karen's previous campaigns were beginning to understand the implications of these changes. When she finally concluded with a self-satisfied, "These measures are simply common sense for a harmonious community," Frank opened the floor for discussion. I raised my hand immediately, and Frank nodded in my direction, looking relieved that someone was willing to speak first. I stood, nodded respectfully to the board, and then addressed the room. "Before we discuss these proposed changes, I think it's important that everyone understands the context behind them." Karen's smile faltered slightly as I continued. 2 weeks ago, without any prior consent or legal authority, Karen attempted to establish a fitness route across my private property. When I questioned this, I was told, incorrectly, that the HOA had the right to use my property without permission. Murmurs spread through the room as I recounted the events, including the sprinkler incident, which elicited a few poorly concealed chuckles. Since then, I've been subjected to a series of retaliatory actions: false complaints to county inspectors, garbage dumped on my lawn, and even a fictional report to animal control claiming I run a dog breeding operation despite not owning any pets. Karen's face had gone from confident to flushed with anger. "That's absurd. You have no proof of any of that." I smiled calmly. "Actually, I do. I've documented every incident, including security camera footage of your son dumping garbage on my property." I turned back to the residents. "But this isn't just about me. Over the weekend, I've spoken with many of you who shared similar experiences of intimidation and overreach." Heads nodded throughout the audience. "What we're seeing tonight is an attempt to retroactively legitimize actions that were never legal in the first place, and to expand powers that were never intended for the HOA." John stood beside me now, adding the weight of his legal expertise. As an attorney specializing in property law, I can state unequivocally that these proposed amendments violate multiple state statutes regarding property rights and would be unenforceable in court. Karen jumped to her feet. "This is ridiculous. I've been working tirelessly to improve this neighborhood while people like him," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "undermine community initiatives at every turn. The fitness route would have benefited everyone." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "About that fitness route, Karen, I think everyone should see exactly how this community initiative came about." I nodded to Mary, who was managing the room's AV system, and the lights dimmed as the projector displayed the video I'd received from my anonymous board ally. Karen's own voice filled the room. "I don't care what the regulations actually say. We'll make him back down. Nobody humiliates me like that and gets away with it. Once we make an example of him, the others will fall in line." The color drained from Karen's face as her own words condemned her. When the video ended, the room remained silent for a long moment before erupting in conversation. Frank banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, while Karen stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. When the noise finally subsided, Frank spoke with newfound authority. "In light of this disturbing evidence, I move that we table the proposed amendments indefinitely and instead convene a special meeting to review board conduct and the proper scope of HOA authority." Board member Diane, who had featured in the video as one of Karen's confidants, suddenly found her shoes fascinating. Board member Thomas, who had been notably quiet throughout the proceedings, seconded Frank's motion. Karen sputtered, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The room had turned against her. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only Karen and Diane opposed tabling the amendments. Frank, looking years older but somehow relieved, announced that the board would meet privately to discuss appropriate next steps and thanked everyone for attending. As the meeting broke up, residents approached me one by one, sharing their relief and gratitude. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner about Karen's behavior. Others asked for copies of the HOA regulations so they could better understand their rights. Mary hugged me and whispered, "I'm repainting my door blue tomorrow." John clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done. I don't think Karen will be spearheading any fitness routes for a while." I watched as Karen gathered her papers and stormed out without speaking to anyone, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. I felt no joy in her public downfall, only relief that the neighborhood might return to being the friendly, reasonable community I'd moved into 3 years ago. In the days following the dramatic HOA meeting, our neighborhood experienced what could only be described as a collective exhale. The oppressive cloud of Karen's micromanagement had lifted, leaving residents cautiously testing their newfound freedom. Mary, true to her word, repainted her front door a vibrant shade of blue. The Rodriguez family proudly displayed their grandson's latest art project in their window. The Jenkins family resumed their early morning basketball practices. It was as if a miniature revolution had taken place, with small acts of personal expression blooming across the neighborhood. I kept my sprinkler system but adjusted the schedule to a more conventional early morning routine, its purpose as a defense mechanism no longer necessary. Karen herself had become scarce. Her normally immaculate lawn went uncut for over a week, an irony not lost on those who had received her infamous lawn height violation notices in the past. Her SUV remained in the driveway most days, the blinds of her house drawn tight. The few times I glimpsed her collecting her mail or loading groceries, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with neighbors she had once surveilled with eagle-eyed scrutiny. Part of me felt sympathy for her.